from back east that wanted me to show him how to collect, and the only time he'd get vacation was Memorial Day, so that's when we went. And I'm convinced that's when I'm going from now on. The trees all survived. So
I missed that part in the beginning.
I pull them out with, where is it?
It's helpful, Paul, but I have a video.
That and my F-150 four-wheel drive, and they come out of the ground in about 10 minutes. I've done that with both Sierra and Utahs. I've only collected Californias once because I've never had the opportunity. So
are you digging under it to put that strap around it?
Put it around the trunk and jerk it out of the ground.
So you're collecting pretty close to the roads, or are you
yeah, I'm on Forest Service roads. Now, if I'm not on a Forest Service road and I can't get my truck there, this is what I use. If I get it out of the box, come along, hook it to another bigger tree and crank it out of the ground. I learned that from our friend Vince Young.
Hey, Paul, can I add something though? Paul has a very important tool in his garden that he's not talking about, and that's a misting system that keeps the foliage wet every 2 or 3 hours after collection for months, 4 or 5 months after he digs it up. That's honestly, I believe, the most important thing. The roots, trees have a resilience. They have stored energy in their tree, and when you dig them up, if you give them the correct environment, their roots will regrow. And the secret to junipers is keeping the soil dry and the foliage wet. And that's, I honestly think Paul's secret, and there's a few juniper masters around the state. That's their secret, keeping the foliage moist and the soil dry, because the roots aren't working anymore. Keep them in a dry, basically not a wet, the bonsai mix is nice because it keeps it moist, but it's not soggy and wet like dirt. Dirt has no oxygen flow or anything like that. So
yeah, and aftercare, as we keep harping on, is the most important thing, and it varies, incredibly with species of the tree. We've talked a lot about junipers now, the importance of misting, how they can be bare rooted. As a matter of fact, I always wash all the soil off my juniper roots before I plant them in 100% pumice. Okay. And misting is the number one most important thing. Pines are a little different. Pines get all their energy from their foliage. They also are very dependent on mycorrhiza, a symbiotic relationship with underground fungus. So with pines, it's important to retain some of the soil they're growing in, because that's where the mycorrhiza will be. And
the white fuzzy stuff you find in the roots, very important.
Much more important for pines than it is for any other species that we commonly collect. So with pines, I retain some of the soil, and we collect a lot of these lodgepole pines down in the Mammoth Lake ski area. They're growing in 100% pure pumice. This is called a root slayer. It's a super sharp, the tip is razor sharp when I take it. It's got sharp saw teeth on the side. Takes maybe 2 minutes to go around the tree in a circle with this and pop it out of the ground and wrap it up, and you're done. So they're very easy to collect. They're in the soil they want to grow in, so they stay in that soil. I always bring back half a pickup load of pumice when I go down to Mammoth too to plant them in.
Is that a Home Depot item there?
I bought it on Amazon. But it's called a root slayer, and if you're serious about collecting, for a lot of, especially for urban collecting things like boxwoods and stuff, I used that. I dug a hedge of 25 boxwoods in 2 hours a few years ago. So it's a great tool.
Well, on that note, let's talk about broadleaf evergreens. We've talked a lot about conifers, pines, and junipers. You've heard the differences and some of the nuances of collecting them. But I'd like to talk about oaks. I've probably tree I've collected more. I've probably collected 50 plus oaks in my life. And most of our natives, born and raised in California, I know our oak trees are, I think, one of our most fantastic resources for bonsai. This is a tree, was collected. I had a friend that lived on a pasture. He was oak woodland where he lived, and he had cattle, he had horses, and he had deer that constantly, every tree was no bigger than 6 foot tall. Some got a little bigger than others, but more or less they were all this mushroom shape, pruned by cows, deer, and horses, and maybe goats too. You might have some goats too. But this is one, he said, hey, you want to go dig that up? So yeah, we dug it up. A trick I learned in the Santa Cruz area, defoliation of live oaks is the most important thing, because after you get all the leaves off, and you want to defoliate it before you start digging or anything, you get all the leaves off, because that shows you the structure of the tree, because you can basically shape the tree in the ground. You'll be eliminating a lot of larger branches, right? Like when we do bonsai, we eliminate large branches, but there could be a real beautiful character branch inside there that you would never see with the leaves on. But the leaf removal, 100% reduction of the leaves is imperative of collecting live oaks.
And it does one other very important thing. When you defoliate the tree at collection, it shuts off transpiration. So those roots, which have been traumatized, no longer have to force water up into the tree, and they get a chance to recover. So they'll recover a lot faster if the tree is defoliated.
I've always gotten underneath the tree. I've seen guys pull trees out of the ground. Absolutely. I've never done it myself, but you can come up and look closely. If you guys want to come up, it's really good to see what defoliation does, because this tree, I honestly have done very little work to. It was a tree I just pretty much dug up out of the ground. I did a little bit of wiring here and there, brought some branches down, having a couple of beers at night, brought some branches down. Defoliated it. This has only been out of the ground less than 5 years. I will note, and I honestly think it's very well developed for a very young tree as far as a bonsai. And leaf size, not all live oaks will have this small leaf, but Bob Bouguet brought in an absolute masterpiece, the same variety as this, of really well cared, well manicured bonsai back here. So check it out. Comes from the same pasture where this came from, in the same, I'm going to assume Bob defoliated his trees. It's a common practice with live oaks is defoliate the trees before you do any collecting. So it basically almost 100%. The only tree I ever lost was one I didn't defoliate 100%. I just left the tips, and that one died. Everything else has been 100% with this technique. So
That's actually true for almost any broadleaf evergreen. Defoliation at collection will ensure its survival.
So broadleaf evergreens covers a lot of different things. It covers olives, boxwoods. Paul, am I not correct?
This boxwood here was my very first collection back sometime in the early 80s. It came from a boxwood hedge down in Land Park, and I collected probably 50 trees from that hedge and brought them to the club sale and sold most of them, including this one. And recently a good friend in the club had this and gave it back to me. And so it's back in my collection. And I collected it almost 40 years ago. And the other one is this interior live oak. I collected that in 1987, right after I bought my property in rescue. It was growing in a pile of rocks next to my vegetable garden. And
body for scale on that, Paul? It's a big tree.
Yeah. Well, you may go over by it, but anyway, this is an interior live oak, and it's the common oak in our Sierra foothills. And I talked about my history in bonsai. I did bonsai starting in the early 80s. In the mid 90s, my kids were all preteens and teens, and I was driving to sports events, and I was a scoutmaster. We were camping every weekend. So I sold most of my collection, including this tree, and went to a longtime club member, Ken Santucci. And he recently moved to Washington and called me up and said he wanted to give it back to me. So it's back in my collection. Again, a tree I collected over 40 years ago.
I have a question. On either of those trees, did you chop the top off or collecting, or was it that height at the time of collecting?
Clarence was asking, was this tree chopped down? And Paul, I don't know about Paul's tree, but this is a natural dead feature that was part of the tree, and it sprouted. When I took all the leaves off, everything just sprouted, and then I started to rebuild. But
and this tree was much taller. It was probably 10, 12 feet tall, and it was chopped at about this level. And the new top was grown. You can still see, if you look at it in the back, there's a small hollow that in another 40 years might be healed over.
Paul's got a few years on me with this one. This one was only collected less than 5 years ago. So everything on here is kind of more or less the way it was. And I mean, minus the bonsai work.
What? I think we're doing fine just the way we're doing. So.
Do we have a question over here?
What time of year did you harvest that? What time of year did you harvest?
This tree was harvested after Christmas. And traditionally, we dig our trees as soon as the first rain comes. It's digging season's open. So it's usually more or less it's because we have access at that time. It's not necessarily, it's easier to dig, obviously, but it's better for the trees. But I know people that dig in the late summer, and they swear by that for deciduous oaks. And I don't know if we have deciduous oak fans in here, but I'm a big one. And the Valley oak, I think, is one of the best material there is. And some guys have success. They're very difficult to collect them from the wild, but late summer in Europe, Harry Harrington is a guy that is popular.
Well, some trees actually do better collected in warm weather. Oaks are one of them. They quite often do well if you collect them in midsummer. Olives, I repot my olives in midsummer. That's the best time of year for them. Yes.
I wonder if this question isn't maybe we got a couple of plant people back there, but I wonder if the live oak's ability to be defoliated and come back isn't an adaptation to having survived in fires for all those years, because the whole stands of oaks will burn and they'll come back. The ground will be desiccated. There won't be any leaves, and yet they're somehow able to pop back up again.
I speculate that that's part of it. Another part of it is they're browsing food for deer. And, deer eat anything they can get a hold of on the live oaks. Another adaptation, it's kind of off the subject, which is interesting, but live oaks, if they've been heavily pruned, the oaks have very variable leaves. A live oak can have anything from a spiky leaf to a smooth round leaf on the same tree. And if a tree has been defoliated or browsed, the new leaves that come back are spiky. And I think that's an adaptation to prevent more deer forage. So
I have an adaptation story in Santa Cruz. One of my inspiration trees was an oak tree. It looked like a Zelkova. It looked like an elm tree. It was the most ramified, and it was in, I don't know, end of summer. It was totally leafless. And Gareth Shepard, a longtime bonsai ex-president, GSBF president, said, "Oh yeah, the oak moths eat that like every 5 or 6 years." But what the ramification that it created on this live oak was astonishing. I mean, it looked like an elm. It was that tight. Something that had been bonsaied by Mother Nature, but these little oak moths.
The oak moths, they come in cycles every 5 years. They hit us in the foothills about 3 years ago and defoliated every blue oak in the Rescue Eldorado Hills area, including in my garden. And by the time you notice it, there's 2,000 of them on your tree, little caterpillars. So part of nature. It's off the subject, but another interesting adaptation I really like is if you get a chance, go up and take a whiff of that Utah juniper that Ian collected. Utah junipers and Rocky Mountain junipers. Most junipers have the really lovely gin scent to them. Not Utahs and Rocky Mountains. They smell exactly like urine. And cat urine to top it. So I think that's an adaptation. Keep deer from eating them. All right.
So do you defoliate after you collect, do you defoliate your?
Every time I repot my oaks, I defoliate.
Religiously.
Every oak you defoliate when you repot?
Every live oak, not my deciduous oaks, because they already don't have leaves, but
Specific for live oak. It's a very specific technique.
and live oaks include coast live oak, interior live oak, canyon live oak, cork oak, holly oak from 2 European species. Those are all considered live oaks. And this tree is another broadleaf evergreen. This is a silverberry, an Elaeagnus pungens that was a yard bush, bigger than me. And I dug it up 2 years ago and defoliated it and removed almost all the branches. It was just a trunk at that time. And in 2 years, it's come back and it's going into a bonsai pot next year. But broadleaf evergreens recover very fast. That's why I love olives. Olives can go from a chunk of firewood to a tree in just a few years. And again, Vince took me on my first olive collecting trips and several since then, he and Sam Medina. And we've collected olive trees that are 6 feet in diameter. And if I had the slideshow, you'd see one. But what we do is we take chainsaws and splitting wedges and we break chunks off of those trees, manageable size. Take the chainsaw, cut the bottom flat, no roots needed. And plant them, and they within 2-3 years you have a bonsai. And as far as I know, Vince developed that technique that we use. This? No, that's a silverberry. No, I didn't bring an olive. My olives are too big to bring. Most of them weigh a couple 100 pounds.
Hey, Paul, didn't Vince also popularize the wet towel technique on pomegranates to keep the tissue? You were the first one I ever saw do that. I thought that was, and that tree's still alive now, doing well at the collection in Oakland. Kathy Shaner, but Paul showed me a picture of you doing this years ago. That's really,
I don't recall.
Anyway, I'd like to change the subject because we have like an example. I think seeing actual trees and stories that go behind them. Bob, you got to come up. You got to bring your oak up here because Bob and I were collecting about the same time in Santa Cruz, and we had access to this property that had these fantastic oaks. This is a sub variety of Coast Live. I can't tell you what it is. We call them Nishiki oaks because every tree in that pasture. Here, you got it. It's so neat to see a tree so well developed. These trees were virtually collected within a few years. We only were allowed to go into this pasture for maybe a year.
Now it's condos.
It's all condos. It's gone, and we had access, and we got in there, and I feel so lucky.
The real cool thing about these live oaks is normally the coast live oaks are smooth one. Sorry, if you live near the coast and look at the oaks there, the bark is really smooth. This particular group, some people theorize that it might be a hybrid, something cross-pollinated with it, but they all got that rough bark on. And the leaves were way bigger when I collected it. And I've defoliated it every time I've transplanted it. And leaves are getting smaller and ramifications come along good. The problem with this tree is, hold this. In any collected tree, you'll have this problem. This was the front. See that there, the dead spot? So I designed it to be that to be the front. But since that all died on that side, this will now be the front, which means the next time I wire it up, I'll move the foliage this way. So it'll look better.
Bob, same thing with me. That used to be my front at some point. But the trees evolve and go with it. Don't get attached to one front. Don't get attached to anything. Just enjoy the tree, style it, enjoy it, grow branches, and continue to develop the tree. Have fun with it. You get so locked into one style that Mother Nature's gonna do what she's gonna do.
Greg, that reminds me of Greg and I used to do regular workshops with Peter Adams, who, if you don't know, is one of the old time world famous bonsai artists from England. And in our workshops, we'd talk about finding the front of the tree, and he said, I can't do an English accent, but he would say, I don't want to hear the F word from you guys. He said that when you see a tree in nature, you walk around it, you see all sides. And he said, it should be the same with a bonsai. You see a lot, particularly in Japan, the big Kokofu Showtime show trees, they're beautiful from the front. If you walk around behind them, there's nothing there because they're built to be seen only from the front. Get your microphone here.
When you defoliate the oak tree, do you pluck the leaves, or do you cut the petiole? Or
I do both. I cut the petioles, but if I get tired of that, I just start pulling leaves, and it usually doesn't harm the buds at all.
Some varieties are different. Some come right off real easy. Some are very resilient. You have to cut them off. Like olives, I've had olives that some come right off. Some you have to rip them or you cut them. So it depends on each tree, really. And oaks are all unique. They're all, unique varieties, each one, like anything from acorns. So
Greg, you got a question back here. Come on up and get the mic. And defoliation works on almost all broadleaf evergreens.
So since we're talking a lot about oaks, my limited experience with those, they're known to be very strong trees. They have this massive taproot often that runs very, very deep. And with my limited experience, the actual feeder roots start quite low from what I've seen. I may have missed it already, but it seems like you're really liking collecting the live oaks. How do you get around? It seems like they're a particular difficult group because of that massive taproot that runs so deep, or is it
very simple? You don't collect those trees.
Yeah.
So you can find trees that have feeder roots, and those are the ones you collect.
Okay. So if there's not feeder roots close to the surface,
you don't bother. You fill your hole back in, and
yeah.
You have to get underneath the nabari of the tree, and that can be very deep sometimes. I've had 4 feet before I got to where roots started to splay. So it's not impossible, but it's a lot more work. But you got to get under where the roots begin, where they start to emanate the nabari area. So, and then, like I said, as long as you're defoliating, you can, like I said, you can't just chop it off. You can't take cuttings like a privet or something, but you got to get under that root ball. You got to get as much under, you got to collect as much of the nabari area as possible, and then prune it back, and then hope to God.
Yeah, privets and olives, I think, are unique in that you can completely flat cut them with no roots. The other one you can do that with is a deciduous tree, but the crepe myrtle can be flat cut like an olive with no roots, and they do fine. No, but I know you do, and Vince grows the roots into new trees. The other thing Vince does is I've seen him take an olive and plant it upside down with its bottom sticking up in the air, and it all of a sudden turns itself around and makes a beautiful tree. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was curious, this tree of Bob's and the one you put over there, how did you find a collected tree that's growing sideways or almost upside down? Is that how you found it and dug it out that way, or how do you do that?
That's a design thing. That's, growing the tree. You kind of, when you collect the tree, you analyze it. You're not styling it, but yeah, good. Yeah. I honestly don't remember. We dug about 5 trees that day, and this little one that I got was at the end of the day. So, but yeah.
Yeah, most often you can find them that way.
I can a tree I got permission to dig. Bob might remember Redwood Nursery. It was a little European lady, had a nursery up the side of the road, and I befriended her, and she said, I got this hawthorn. You want this hawthorn thing? And I said, okay. And so Paul, can you hold this while I just want to show. So this tree, we were talking about how we designed the tree, right? So this tree was growing like that when I collected it. See the roots coming out the side? There's a flat root ball, and I lost this whole section of the roots. So I turned it this way and made it a cascade. So basically the tree will kind of tell you where it wants to go. Not always, but it'll show you which way it's going. But the whole left side of that died. So I turned it on the side because it wasn't really attracted to it as an upright tree. So that's an artist thing. You see the movement of the tree and you build it around what you see. And
I think we all have trees that have had a disaster that you can turn into good fortune by redesigning the tree. So
this tree, I can't tell you which one's alive. The lifeline is so complicated on this root ball because it was a nursery tree that she said she brought it from Europe 50 years ago, and she propagated all her hawthorns from her nursery off of this tree. And she's like, yeah, you can have that. And I'm like, really? So, you know, the opportunity, she said, yeah, go dig it up. So I dug it up. It was in leaf. It was springtime, but it lived. I dug a big pit around it and collected as much root as best I knew what to do. It was, I mean, I hadn't been doing bonsai probably a year, but she gave me the confidence, said, yeah, go dig it up, you know? And so it was, you know, be ready to get trees. You never know. Your grandma's house said, yeah, they're moving tomorrow. Did you want to take that? That happens a lot. Maples, Japanese maples can be collected at any time of the year in leaf. As long as you give them the correct aftercare, be ready to collect trees whenever you have a chance, because they won't be there the next time you go back.
And I want to say, if you're driving down the street and you see a beautiful trunk, you know, don't be shy. Go knock on the door and say, you know, I'll remove your tree for free. And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. People go, oh, I'm sick of that tree. You'll take it out for free? I've done that probably half a dozen times. I also used to run, when I had more energy, and add in Craigslist for free tree and shrub removal. And I've gotten several olive trees that way, and various other, I got in boxwood hedges, mainly boxwood hedges and olive trees. But people call me up and say, if you'll remove it for free, it's all yours. So I've gotten a lot of trees that way. Yeah, Bob, you need the microphone. Oh, wait, you got a question up here first.
Just a comment. Our last experience with urban collection was a drunk driver plowed into our neighbor's front yard and lopped off a Japanese maple, and we've got it and it's coming back.
Oh, yeah. You give that to Bob.
Most of you know Larry White. He's a friend of mine. It's in Midori Club in San Jose. His method of urban collecting is anytime a new family moves into the neighborhood, he walks over and introduces himself and says, asks them what they're going to do, or they're remodeling, or you're going to do any landscaping. And if they say yes, well, would you like me to dig that out for you? I'll take care of it for you. Good neighbor stuff. And he's got lots of nice trees because of that.
Larry White also told me one of his collecting techniques is always carry an orange Caltrans vest in his car.
Oh, is it? Hey, can we take a step backward? I know there's a lot of questions, but this may be a lot of information. Most of us are bonsai addicts, and kind of all this terminology may be second nature. But if this isn't all second nature, please speak up, because Paul and I are just going to unload information from our experiences. But if you have any questions, don't be afraid to speak up, and you know.
Okay, so my other question was with the defoliation of the oaks. I was always told not to do two major things at once, but obviously there must be some reason that you do this at the same time as transplanting, as repotting. I was wondering what that is.
Also, that was the transpiration. That
goes to Greg and these people. I hear questions while I'm answering it. That applies almost exclusively to junipers. the doing two things at once, the one insult per year, not entirely true, but it's a nice, easy thing to say. But as you do more and more, you learn what you can and can't do and what the tree can take. And different, it's entirely different by species. It is fairly true with junipers, but not so much with other trees.
So with the oak, you can do it, but is there a specific reason why it's good to do it when you transplant, or is that just?
Yeah, as we mentioned before, it shuts down transpiration and encourages backbiting. You get more ramification.
Yeah, I just want to change it up just a little bit. If you wouldn't mind talking about the nuances of the deciduous native oaks collecting and survival.
Yeah,
if you don't mind.
Deciduous native oaks, our two main ones are valley oak and blue oak. And they're the two main culprits for having the deep tap roots. And they're very, very difficult to collect in nature. Greg and I both have some nice ones, but they all came from nurseries. I've tried to collect valley oaks with zero success, and same with blue oaks. And I've got, 1 million blue oaks within walking distance of my house. But I think with deciduous oaks, and in my experience, you've almost got to go with nursery grown trees.
I have one that's been for years, and it's never been real healthy.
Yeah, they just.
It's very alive, it seems to. But it's blue oak, it's been a lot for years, so I keep it, even though it's not much of a fruit.
Deciduous oaks can be developed so quickly from acorn and have a beautiful root. So I've grown them. I've had no success collecting deciduous oaks. You may hear rare collecting stories where they survive, but it's almost 0%. But from acorn, they develop so quickly in the ground. You can develop the most perfect root system with a vigorous tree. I had one for sale here, barky movement. Nobody bought it, but the valley oak develops so quickly from acorn. There's no reason not to start fresh with them. Blue oaks are much slower growing, but fantastic little bonsai trees. There was an oak nursery. Paul and I got turned on to Mick down at Calaveras Nursery. I got some old blue oaks from nursery stock that were grown from acorn in the 60s. And I got a valley oak from him. That's going to be a killer tree someday.
That was a great resource that's gone now. But
yeah. But don't give up on acorns. But the live oaks are so successful. You almost want to, as much as we love our white oaks, they're beautiful. I'm obsessed with deciduous oaks, but just the chances of getting them to survive, it's not worth it.
Yeah. I want to change pace a little bit and just talk over a little bit about digging tools. I brought some of the things. I've shown you a couple of things. The other really important tools in collecting are saws for cutting roots. And you can use a regular folding saw. I like these. Battery operated saws.
That one especially. Paul got more Utah junipers with that little saw.
You get down underneath and cut the bottom. But the other nice thing about these, with the folding saw, you cut two roots and it's dull because of the grit in the soil. With these, you can carry a dozen extra blades and go all day long. The other tool I use the most is this. My little handheld pickmatic, and that's great. You can dig your trench around the tree, work in the roots with the pick, and this one has dug a lot of trees.
And a lot of bonsai too. I've seen you hack away on your root ball with that.
Yeah. But, the other thing that's really important when you dig a tree is to keep the roots moist, and what we use is we take old towels, rags, whatever, wet them, wrap what roots you have And then we use stretch wrap. It comes in a 4-inch, 5-inch roll with a handle. You just wrap that sucker up. It can stay for days like that, and without stressing the tree too much. So stretch wrap, electric saws are really important. And then the other thing I always take collecting is my spray bottle, and I mist the trees even when they're in the back of my truck. I'll stop on the way home and mist them again. So that's all I had to say about tools.
Hey, I have a little a happy story to say about this little redwood here. This was my first tree I ever collected back when Bob and I were collecting. I started in '99. This was probably collected that, maybe Christmas in '99. And this tree is going to be on display at the Pan Expo as my accent to my hawthorn, which was one of my other first trees I collected. But just you get good material, it will develop very quickly. As long as once you learn the techniques and everything, get good material. Don't waste your time with something it's not going to excite you. You need to go and work on your trees in your garden, and good trees will make you work on your trees. But super happy. This little tree has the most incredible little root. It's called, where's Doc Ward? He calls it the hockey puck technique with his roots. And this has a hockey puck, like you wouldn't believe. So it's pretty, but 20 years, 20 plus years, 22 years of growing a bonsai. Come and check it out. It's got a really, really nice base. You want to do it?
And we can talk a little bit about collecting redwoods too, because that again is a whole different animal. I've had one opportunity to collect redwoods over in Santa Cruz with a good friend, Bob Potts, who is a bonsai grower over there. And he got permission on one of his patients' private property. And what we learned was what you see above the ground is probably not what you're going to end up being your bonsai. Everything that's going to end up being your bonsai is under the ground. So you dig down and suddenly you find this gnarly trunk. And again, redwoods are another one you can flat cut. And I don't know if you've ever driven up Highway 101, seen the little stands that sell redwood burls. You can put those in water and they grow and they put out roots. Well, redwoods are amazingly durable. So the same thing with a tree. But my best redwood is a bonsai about 3.5 feet tall, about this big around, and about 80% of that tree was underground when I dug it. It was the rest of the tree was a bean pole 40 feet tall, and I timbered it and then dug and dug and dug till I got this nice big base, and it didn't blink. So redwoods are different, but most of the tree is going to be underground.
Any questions about redwoods? Anybody?
And I know many of you understand that it makes sense to get a loan. Of course.
I have more of a general question. Do you guys use rooting hormone to help promote the growth of the roots after you collect them?
I don't. And rooting hormone may help. What rooting hormone is replaces the auxins that the growing tips of the tree would be producing, which stimulates roots. But when you collect a tree, the roots have to go through a healing process before they even want to grow. So I think by the time that happens, any rooting hormone you put on it's going to be gone anyway. The top will have started to grow and produce auxins. And I think that's the natural way it works. The other thing I want to kibosh is Super Thrive. How many of you have been told to use Super Thrive on collected trees? It's snake oil. It has been studied numerous times on scientific studies, has been proven to do absolutely nothing for trees except make money for the guy that sells it. So don't waste your money on Super Thrive, HB101, vitamin B12, or whatever, B1, I guess. All those things are absolutely worthless to your trees. Water, the beneficial sunlight are what your trees need.
The beneficial bacteria in the soil is the best thing for your new roots to grow. The mycorrhiza, the beneficial bacteria, that relationship is the magic of trees.
And we're still learning more and more about mycorrhiza. There was a study by a forester in Canada Canada was using Roundup, killing all the underbrush in their planted timber plantations with the idea that they'd compete with the timber trees. Well, all of a sudden, when they got rid of all the huckleberries and shrubs, their timber trees started to die. And it turns out these mycorrhiza are little communication networks that actually they feed each other. The trees will feed the shrub will feed the tree. In times of need, trees will feed each other in times of need, and it's all through mycorrhiza, which is why it's really important in natural trees. In potted trees, again, they're not communicating with other trees, but what the mycorrhiza does, it communicates with your soil microorganisms, your bacteria and other fungi on the soil to break down the fertilizer. A lot of people don't realize the fertilizer you're putting on your tree is not eaten by the tree. The fertilizer first has to be eaten by the soil microorganisms, which then feed the tree. So that's why it's really important to be careful keeping your soil healthy.
Stay away from Miracle Grow. It's a death sentence to your trees. I mean, I shouldn't say it's not a death sentence, but you're trying to cultivate this healthy environment in your root system. Miracle Grow is the worst thing that you can do for that.
It has a place.
Yeah.
It can be used. It's excellent for new material, pre-growing bonsai you're trying to develop size on. You're growing seedlings and you want to get fat trunks, Miracle Grow does the job. But I would never put it on a tree in a bonsai pot.
Exactly. You know, another thing we talked about, Paul was saying the mycorrhiza, and you see trees growing literally in a rock. They have no soil. The root is just encased in a rock, but they look vibrant. These little pine trees, the most healthiest thing I've ever seen in my life. They can farm their own food. They don't need anything, really. Once their bacteria levels with the mycorrhiza is all in perfect symbiosis, they don't need anything. They farm their own food. And this new science coming down the pike is pretty exciting. And if you can get your Paul, we use let's talk about the fish kelp mix that we use, but it's cold press. It's unlike the fish emulsion that's been baked, basically cooked all the beneficial bacteria out. Paul turned me onto a cold press, which has all the good stuff still in it and inoculates your roots.
Yeah, and so the the microorganisms in your soil love this stuff, and it's the best thing for them. The cold processed fish. The only nice thing is cold processed fish doesn't stink like the Alaska fish emulsion you buy in the nursery does. It smells like the ocean. And kelp is a whole other thing. And again, Peter Adams, our old teacher, taught us this. Kelp is high in, now I can't remember the name of the plant hormone.
Gibberellic? Not gibberellic acid.
No, it's high in the other plant. There's two plant hormones. There's cytokinin. Thank you. You get old, you forget things. Cytokinin is responsible for pushing buds. So when you feed a tree with kelp, you get a lot more back budding. So it's a very, very good product to use.
So we have to reiterate though, this collecting is a special time in the tree's life. We're not going to be feeding it at all once we collect a tree. Some people believe you can give them a light feed, but in my experience, I leave the roots alone, let them do their thing, let them reestablish in the pot, and wait till the tree gets established and starts pushing growth. Then we start to feed. Then we start moving into getting the tree vigorous on a different level. And so I'd like to the one thing, there's not a lot of information really collecting deciduous trees because we don't have a lot of deciduous trees in California. We've got redwoods and olives and oaks, but true deciduous trees. And this tree originated from England. I believe it's an English variety. But good news for y'all, this are the easiest to dig because they can live in a boggy, wet soil, and you don't really have to. This one had this was a native. It was native to Europe. I don't know what variety, but this was grown in a nursery tub for years and then put in the ground. So it had a pretty nice root ball. Where this was a wild collected tree, so it was a little different. So I collected more of this root ball, but this one I was able to collect a lot more of a dense root pad, and that's because they're hawthorns. They're monogyna, I believe, is the variety, but they're sub varieties because you can see the difference Leaves are totally different. They have different, they're similar varieties. Let's say they're like lobata, like valley oak, but there's a lot of variation within lobata as well. So there's variation just like the oaks are.
And we do have some deciduous trees in California that are native that are collectible, but again, they're not that common. One tree I've collected quite a bit, and because it grows on my property and rescue, is California styrax or California snowbell. You may be familiar with the Japanese snowbell. It's a beautiful tree with pendulous white and yellow flowers. And there was one on the slideshow. You can pretend like you saw it. We have a California variety that's deciduous. Flowers are a little bigger than the Japanese one and more fragrant than the Japanese one. They're wonderful trees to collect.
Timing wise, early spring.
Early spring before they leaf out. Yeah.
As you would repot most of your trees, any tree.
With deciduous trees, particularly if you can get them just as the buds are starting to swell, that's your 100% guaranteed time.
Yep.
Any more questions?
Oh, the snowbell? Snowbell?
California snowbell, Styrax redivalis.
The honeysuckle, Paul's got some honeysuckle on his property that are really neat too. They have little red berries.
We have a native chaparral honeysuckle, and it's a long vine. It grows all the way up to the top of the oak trees, but I've collected them and chopped them and made small trees out of them. They survive collection very well.
I have a couple of questions on the chat for you guys. I have a question from David Remmer. He says, is there a time that you won't collect redwoods? Can you collect them any time all year round?
I would say yes. I don't know of a bad time to collect redwoods. They're pretty bulletproof. Yeah, unless it's freezing. Maybe not if it's freezing, which we don't get.
And I think real high heat of the summer is not your best time. Your odds are going to be better if you collect them during the wet season.
One more chat question. This is from Robert Hughes. When you collect a tree, what kind of soil substrate do you put it in when you pot it?
I use almost entirely 100% pumice, except as I mentioned on pines, I'll use a little bit of the native soil, hoping to preserve the natural mycorrhiza. But everything else, I can't think of any exceptions, goes in 100% pumice. Pumice is, as a matter of fact, pumice by itself is actually excellent bonsai soil. You can probably grow most trees that we're now paying money for akadama and hygge and things like that. You could probably grow them just as well in pumice if you're watering and feeding correctly.
I tend to put it whatever I have available at the time because I tend to repot trees and I recycle my soil constantly. I put it in the ground, I inoculate it. So I'm conifers, I will keep it to a pretty strict aggregate base, lava, pumice, akadama. I'll use akadama periodically. Akadama, it's very expensive though. It's not for just any type of tree, but for a good tree that I really want to develop the roots, I will use akadama in my good trees. But deciduous, oaks, you can use fir bark, anything really, as long as it's sifted. You don't want any dust in there clogging everything up. You want to keep the free draining and mix it.
Clarifying question on that. So when you first dig that tree up, are you removing like all of the soil that it was in or most of the soil that it was in and replacing that with pumice?
Whatever you want.
Filling the remainder of the container with pumice? Does it depend on scenarios?
It's a combination. Some trees, you have to keep some of the root ball intact. You can't bear root. Redwoods, yes. Redwoods, I get pretty much everything out. It really depends. There's so many different varieties and different situations for the, but you want to get the nasty field soil out because it's going to rot the roots. If you leave it in longer than 2 years, the roots will rot. If the tree doesn't recover quickly, if the tree recovers quickly and it starts to grow, it's going to be okay. But you want to get the original field soil is not going to be beneficial for bonsai.
And it depends a lot on the type of soil they're growing in. Trees like the trees we collect in pumice at Mammoth, that's what they love to grow in, and they do great. Pines from the high Sierras are growing in decomposed granite, which back when I started in bonsai was our main soil ingredient. My teachers back then told you use decomposed granite and pine bark. And that's what everybody used because that's what our Japanese teachers taught us to use.
Absolutely.
Turns out that's not what they use in Japan, but they use akadama and pumice. But the type of soil it's growing in will make a lot of difference. Some of you, if you've been to sales and shows, have seen Bob Scheiman, Mendocino Coast Bonsai. He specializes in redwoods, pygmy cypress, and shore pines. His pygmy cypress and shore pines are growing in the world's most horrible soil. It's like plaster of Paris. And this is why they're pygmy. They're normal trees that can be hundreds of years old and only a few feet tall because they're growing in this horrible soil. And because of the consistency of the soil, if you buy one of those, you need to take years gradually transitioning it to bonsai soil. If you bare root it, all that plaster of Paris soil is going to tear all the feeder roots off and you've killed the tree. So it depends a lot on what they're growing in. And I know I've killed 2 out of the 4 pygmy cypresses I bought from Bob. So
I've seen a whole root ball get filleted off because the root ball, the whole support system of the tree broke off because they didn't protect the root system. It literally just broke off in all the roots. So you have to, it's, there's no exact answer for a lot of these things. Pygmy cypresses are very specific and you have to, it takes years to remove. I've had one almost 15 years and I'm taking pie sections out. You've heard this, it's a common way to take little sections of the root ball out over years. And pygmy cypress is an absolute, I can attest to that one for sure. And
there's other soils you don't want to use. For example, Utah junipers are growing in dolomite, limestone, and it's usually big chunks and not much actual soil there at all. Which is number one why they work so well pulling them out with my truck, because they're not really heavily anchored, but it doesn't make good soil for growing the tree after you bring it home. So all of my Utah junipers I bare root when I bring them home.
Hey, before I forget, Paul and we got to do a native show. We've done a few California native bonsai exhibits for the state convention. And we had Frank Bardello, was probably one of the most famous bonsai masters in our state, if not our country. And he brought, Paul, I cannot remember what it was. It was a chestnut or something. It was in California. What was it? Well, no, it wasn't
California nutmeg.
It was the nutmeg.
Sorry,
yes.
Yeah.
So keep your eyes peeled out there. There's a lot of varieties that someone told me, no, Valley Oak, you can never reduce the leaves in that. Don't ever waste your time with that. And I never listened to Bob Hilders. But don't listen to what people say. Go and try it, experiment for yourself. Because my best tree in my collection is a Valley Oak that I got from that old nursery. Yeah. And it's got a soul that you can't replace. Environment. But oaks, something that everybody can go and dig and have success. And boxwoods, there's so many trees that are pretty accessible that we can also, will survive and you'll have a lot of fun with. Japanese maples, who knows who's going to dig up an old Japanese maple? Who doesn't want to find that? So I'm going to give my number to anybody that wants help on Japanese maple extraction because I have some experience. We all, Japanese maples can be dug up at any time of the year. That's the fun thing. You just have to know what to do with the foliage. But please, if anybody has any information or leads, it doesn't have to happen tonight. If you know someone, just pass it on to Dodie or to Renee, and we'll winter time, obviously after Christmas is the best time when we know we've got some rain by then, and go have some fun. Sure,
that's a good place. A lot of nice trees there.
Where's the deciduous oak guy? Did he live? Because that's all I got back there is deciduous oak.
Okay, let's keep going. Urban Door is collected from the
that
landscape.
boxwood, Paul?
That's a boxwood hedge I dug up a few years ago. I didn't get the whole hedge. I got about 25 trees and okay, again, we talked about this, juniper aftercare. This is how I do it. Wash all the native soil from the roots with a hose. Do not remove any more foliage than necessary. The foliage that needs the foliage to grow new roots. Very important is put the tree in the smallest pot it will fit in, and then tie it tightly so it can't budge a millimeter. Because as those new baby roots emerge, the wind hits it and it moves, it breaks all those off and the tree might die. So it's very, very important to tie the tree in. And then the idea of the smallest pot is the pot's too large, the soil will stay too wet and rot your roots right off. So you want the soil to stay fairly moist, but not wet.
How do you judge the size of the pot?
Smallest it'll fit in. Literally.
Okay.
You gotta jam those roots into the pot. So, and then filtered sun. Oh, we're on pines now. Okay. Again, I keep a lot of the native soil on pines because of the mycorrhiza. You can trim foliage on pines where you wouldn't do it on a juniper. You can see this western white pine I dug in Mammoth. I've trimmed a lot of the foliage. It was so tall and now it's this tall, and it's doing fine. But don't work on them too soon. I've killed a lot of pines by working on them too soon. So go through at least one season of candle flush and setting new buds before you do anything with it. Okay. Broadleaf evergreens. We didn't mention this before. Once you defoliate the tree and trim it, plant it, fill it with pumice, and then I put a plastic bag over olives, boxwoods. I did it with this silverberry, any of the broadleaf evergreens. If you cover them with a black plastic bag, put them in a warm but not hot area, it'll start popping buds within weeks. It really encourages the new buds to pop all over the trunk. So as soon as you see the buds, you can gradually move it back to sun.
Hey, Paul, do you ever experiment with the black bag technique where they literally cover and close the whole tree when they collect a tree? They'll totally uncover. Harry Harrington in England.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm talking about here.
Yeah. So it's totally covering the tree.
The whole tree is covered in a black bag.
What's the vegetable? Rutabagas? Is that what they do? They put it in the darkness and it makes the tree grow. It's some. I don't know if it's rutabagas. Does anybody know what it is? It's
you lost
some
me.
vegetable that they put in the darkness and it grows. But anyway, this black bag techniques work. I did it with some elms cuttings. I just took cuttings, all very different varieties. Everything grew in the black bag. It's just, and then as soon as it starts to warm up, you start to aerate.
And I learned during the break that it can work on junipers too, because it's just the equivalent of misting.
Use a Maruyama. His greenhouse is almost black. It's almost dark on some certain sections of his. So, but it keeps it wet and moist, and the roots protected.
He doesn't. Mrs. Maruyama does.
He doesn't.
Okay, go on. Deciduous aftercare.
Look at that crepe bottle.
When you dig deciduous is very important. Just trim it back to basic structure. You don't need any foliage or small branches. This is a crepe myrtle I dug at our Carmichael house last November. And as soon as the weather warmed up, it popped buds all over. July, it was covered with blooms, and it still has flowers all over it.
He showed me a picture 2 days ago.
Out of the ground a year. It's still in the wooden box. It's going to go in a bonsai pot next spring. But so, what?
Is it all pumice?
It's in all pumice. Almost everything I collect goes in all pumice.
Did you flat cut that one also?
I did. Chainsawed the bottom nice and flat. So it's going to go in an oval pot about that deep next spring.
Keep your roots.
What? I kept a few. Oh, did I keep the bottom? No, I know you would have, but.
Boy, that makes, if you keep the tree
keeping the mic.
That's a better tree. You can end up with a very, very interesting tree if you just keep the cut off portion, turn it upside down and bury it completely. And when you see new growth coming up to the top, those are all your new trees that are going to come out of that thing.
Well, I dug this and built the box and planted it while I was taking a lunch break I was remodeling the house we bought down in Carmichael. So I just took a break to dig up one of the trees, get a little bonsai fix. So I didn't do anything with the rest of it. Given the deciduous trees, you can fertilize the first year after you dig it as soon as the new foliage hardens off. Everybody know what hardens off means? Okay. All right.
Hardening off is when the waxy cuticle has formed on the leaf. It's when the tree's regained its energy. It's really an important thing to know in horticulture, because once the waxy cuticle is set up on the leaf, the tree has regained energy, and then you can prune. It's a really good indicator.
I talked about some of the big olives I dig with Vince and Sam. We dug this tree in Rio Linda, I don't know what, 4 years ago in December, and we split off, I don't know, maybe 25 chunks around the outside that we made into bonsai. And then we had this big centerpiece, and Vince said, I don't want it. Sam said, I don't want it. I said, well, I'm a fool. I'll take it. So I went and rented a Home Depot trailer, and Vince rigged up a ramp and winch system to get it into the trailer. And we got it loaded up. It filled the entire trailer. It's a good 6-7 feet across. And I took it home, tied a rope around it to a tree, pulled the trailer out from under it, and it flopped on the ground. And I piled soil around it, and that's where it sits today. But it's growing. It's doing real well. It had none of this foliage when we brought it home.
Is there any beer in the beer bottle, Paul?
What do you think?
Looks kind of empty. Looks kind of dry.
That's strictly a prop for scale.
Yeah, that's it.
Greg and I need beer to work on bonsai. Lodgepole pine, I dug at Mammoth years ago. One of my favorites, and it's too big to bring down here, so I brought a picture.
Did you do the bending yourself?
Yeah, then I did that. Well, I did it in a workshop with Peter T. And we really rigged up a system of winches and pulleys and rebar to put that bend. The top was going up, and now it's going down. And matter of fact, Peter, I don't think had ever done that with all the rebar, and he took a bunch of pictures to. Okay. California juniper. I was lucky enough a few years ago to go to Mojave on a trip with Harry Harrell, the Mr. California juniper. And that tree, when I dug it, I was 10 years younger, so it probably weighed 250 pounds, and I was about a mile from the truck. So I tied it to my backpack, and I made it back, but it's a lot smaller now. It only weighs about 150 pounds now. But Harry Harrell was quite a character. I went on this trip with him, and I was digging trees. Everybody was digging trees. And it's where I learned Yuzo's method of using a bar to pop them out of the ground. But Harry, I was hiked up a big hill, and I came down. I had 3 trees, and I sat down to have a drink of water and take a rest. And Harry comes down with his arms full of trees, and he goes, "What you doing?" I said, "I'm just resting." He goes, "You need me to carry those for you?" Harry was 92 years old then.
Bonsai keeps you young.
Yeah. We talked about chaparral honeysuckle. That's a native deciduous honeysuckle that grows on our Sierra foothills. Beautiful yellow flowers and pretty easy to collect if you can find them. Big olive, I dug with Vince and several other club members. This is 1/3 of an olive stump. Vince has a third, Howard has a third, and I had the other third. Actually, when I was reducing my collection, I sold this tree to Peter T. last year, and he's since sold it for a lot more money than he paid me. But this stump had been sitting upside down for, I don't know what did they say, about a year. They'd been pulled out with a backhoe and it was just a stump sitting upside down, but we noticed there were some green buds. So we split it into 3 pieces and they all grew and did great. So lodgepole pines, just a little twin trunk lodgepole pine from Mammoth. Again, growing in pure pumice. First Sierra juniper I ever collected in 2007 at Cisco Grove. I went on a trip with Scott Chad and collected this at the top of a big granite knob at Cisco Grove. And then it rode down as I slid down the hill on my butt. And it was an ice tree. And again, I sold that to Peter last year. And he sold it to a doctor in Davis for a whole lot more than he paid me.
I'm seeing a pattern.
Yeah. How fast an olive develops. On the left is the olive right after it was dug, and on the right was 2 years later in a show. So olives are great for fast bonsai. Interior live oak, just another one of my interior live oaks I've collected.
I recognize that paper, Paul.
That's here at our club show. Okay. Wisteria, I dug out of my yard, and that's here at our show too. Wisteria are weird. Sometimes they bloom like that. Sometimes they bloom and then won't bloom again for 5 years. I don't know what the answer is, but this one's pretty good. And actually, I have several others I like better, so I sold this one at our auction last month. I don't know who got it, but it's a nice tree. So. Probably. And I put this one in here because most of the fun of collecting in the Sierras is just hiking around and looking at the beautiful trees. Greg and I were up at Cisco Grove and we found this tree and we took pictures. There's no way in the world you'd ever collect this tree. It's growing in a crack in the granite and the roots probably go down 20 feet into the crack. The tree is gorgeous with dead wood, probably weighs 500 pounds. But I've been back to visit it twice since we saw it there. So
Paul tried to get me to dig this one. You said, we can get this one.
We were considering it, but
I think it was about 8 feet wide at the base.
We came to our senses. No, it's a humongous tree, but wouldn't that make a beautiful bonsai? And Greg is trying to decide whether you can dig this Western juniper. We talked him out of it. That's Greg on the left.
Paul, that had the most twisted dead wood.
This is a beautiful tree. It looks
straight, but it absolutely corkscrews to the pinnacle.
It spiraled all the way up the tree to a natural tingen at the top. A beautiful tree, but again, something to inspire you for bonsai.
I will tell you that it was 19 degrees in the back of Paul's truck that night. We were up there.
Yeah, we camped that trip. We froze. But this was on the road from Highway 395 up to Tom's place down by Bishop. So. And if you go down there, drive up that road, you'll see it. It's worth taking the side trip to see that tree. Inyo National Forest, El Dorado National Forest, Tahoe National Forest, and I called last year to see about getting a permit at Tahoe. I talked to the Forest Products Ranger, and she told me that no, permits aren't required for personal use. So that was news to me, but apparently you can dig a tree or two in Tahoe National Forest without going to jail.
But does that mean you technically...
From hundreds of years ago, it says every family in the United States can dig a Christmas tree.
Yeah, they charge you to dig the Christmas tree, so.
But if it's personal use, you technically can't sell it. Right?
Yeah, technically can't sell it, but how are they going to know? So, But those are the 3 forests where I've collected. I've been told if you go to the Forest Service off on Stanislaus National Forest and ask about digging trees, they threaten to shoot you. And we've dug in Humboldt National Forest in the other side of Nevada and went to the ranger station there. Actually, that was my very first collecting trip with George Yamasaki from Auburn. He was an old bonsai teacher that I worked with, and he and Walt Brainerd from our club went there. And we went to the ranger station and asked for permit to dig junipers, and they looked at us like we were crazy. And we explained we did bonsai, and they looked at us like we were even crazier. And they said, well, we can give you a firewood permit and you can take all the junipers you want. So they gave us a firewood permit and we went and collected trees. And
actually, I have a couple questions. So are you using any sort of latex spray-on product on the foliage?
I've experimented that once and the tree died.
Interesting. Okay. What about root heat?
What?
Root heat. Are you using any sort of heat mats or
anything? I do. I have a heat cable underneath the gravel in my root house.
Nice. Okay.
It's very, very low heat. Basically, it just keeps it from freezing.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything that would benefit more from root heat than anything else?
Cuttings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as collected trees, I don't know.
Cool. Thank you.
And behind you, there's a question.
So you've kind of talked about this here and there with trees growing more in rock-like formations. Is there a way to determine how much the roots are so deep that it's not worth it? Or is there any way to not disturb a tree to figure out if it's possible to collect?
If they're growing in a crack in granite, you're not going to be able to collect them.
Fair enough.
I mean, some of the most beautiful trees are growing in cracks in granite, but they're going to stay there.
Yeah.
Most often they're going down way, way deep in that crack before they find any duff to grow in. So, yeah, don't be tempted. They won't live. If they're in granite that is flaking and it has pieces you can lift off of the root, we've found trees that way that have a root ball under a slab of granite, and the whole thing will want to come up like a pancake.
That was my next question.
But if it's growing in a crack, forget it.
Okay. Would it be better to take the whole kind of flaky granite with the roots and transfer to a plot? Like to a pot first, or is it just
leave the rock in the mountains?
That's fair enough. Okay.
Once you break the rock, you'll have the root ball.
You'll have the root ball.
It'll release the roots.
Okay.
Row of pockets.
Okay.
You can find those little sweet spots.
We were collecting. Greg and I were collecting with Roger Steele, and Greg found it was a ponderosa or a Jeffrey pine. We're still not sure which. But remember, you got that tree and you picked it up. It was just one nice round root ball. And perfect pancake of roots. And
not one root into the rock, just a solid. I've had oaks that same way.
Yeah. So so you know, that's why you get lucky. So.
Great. Thank you.
Question?
Wayne.
Good job, Tina.
You said to not try to collect the oaks that have the tap roots. Are those oaks able to be propagated?
Propagated.
Take a piece of it off. And
like from cuttings. I haven't had good results growing any species of oaks from cuttings or air layers.
Acorns, honestly,
yeah.
Like the black pines, like you guys see the technique for the black pines, they grow from seed. And they cut the roots off and redevelop the roots. The trees they're growing, creating in like 10 years are unbelievable. So they're a million percent better than a lot of the stuff that's.
And to clarify a little bit, I didn't strictly say you can't collect trees that have a tap root. You can't collect trees that have a tap root with no feeder roots above it. If you find feeder roots, you can chop that tap root off because its only function is just to anchor the tree.
To answer one of the questions here, if you take
Give Vince the microphone.
There was a question of whether you collect a tree in the wild. If you can grab that tree and you shake it, and the base of the tree will move at the trunk line, you most likely can take that tree out. If it's so solid that you can't shake it, like in a rock position, don't even try. I tried that. I spent 4 hours chipping away at a granite rock, had a real small, probably 12-inch high juniper in it that was really fantastic. I spent 4 hours chipping away at that small crack and never did get it out, so I left it.
And the idea of being able to wiggle it isn't always true, because a tree growing in a crack, sometimes that long stem will be going down the crack and it'll wiggle like crazy, but you'll never find any roots.
I had a similar experience where the tree had this beautiful base that had splayed around the rock, but I broke the granite away, and there was a trunk. It wasn't root that went down probably 8 feet before, and I could never find, but it was all trunk behind the rock. There was no roots. So
I tried to dig a juniper in Nevada one time. It was growing in flaked granite, so the granite was in slabs, several inches thick and a few feet around, which were big but movable. And the root went under this slab, and I figured, oh, it's going to be nice roots under there. And I moved the slab, the root kept going, just a root like a fire hose that went about 30 feet from the tree before it ever anchored in the soil underneath these rocks. So you never know what you're going to find.
I recommend people coming up and looking at these trees, looking at the little neat parts of the trees that you like, and see what, and see wild trees that have been collected over the last 20 years or maybe more. Paul, when did you dig your oak?
That oak in about 87.
So there's a lot of history here, and you can learn a lot about the way, things you like in trees, things you don't like. So come on up and look
I just want to say one more thing, not particularly about this Sierra juniper, but Greg and I were on a collecting trip with Roger Steele, and I collected this juniper. Greg saw these beautiful, gnarly deadwood manzanitas growing next to it. And I said, Greg, you can't collect manzanitas. They die. And he says, oh, I got to try. And I said, you're wasting your time. These manzanitas can't be collected and live. And so I dug this and another tree. I don't know if you remember our show last year. I showed a big Sierra juniper that I've grafted, Shimpaku. And I dug both those trees in the time Greg killed a couple of manzanitas. So I've never let him, I just can't let him live that one down.